speak English better.
With Let's Talk Podcast.
Welcome to another deep dive. Usually when we think about learning a new language, we picture these massive, intimidating textbooks.
Oh, absolutely.
You
Just
know?
endless lists of verb conjugations.
Yeah, and complex grammar rules, and then the exceptions to those exceptions. It feels a bit like, I don't know, trying to memorize the engineering schematics for a skyscraper just so you can ride the elevator.
It's an incredibly daunting process. And adults, especially, tend to get completely bogged down in the mechanics of it all. We want to understand the structural integrity of a past participle before we even know how to say hello.
Right. Which is exactly why today's deep dive is such a fun departure. We're looking at a foundational document designed for absolute ground zero English beginners.
Yeah, a really fascinating little source.
It is. Specifically, it's a worksheet focused entirely on how to communicate about hobbies and free time. But what's genuinely surprising about this guide isn't the vocabulary itself.
It's the philosophy behind it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Stripping away all our complicated adult jargon leaves us with this quirky sociological artifact. It accidentally forces us to look at how we actually define joy.
That's a great way to frame it. When you remove nuance, you are left with the absolute core mechanics of an idea.
Yeah.
And the way this guide breaks down the very human need for leisure into its fundamental building blocks is quite revealing.
Let's get right into those building blocks because the very first definitions on the page gave me pause.
The context definitions, right?
Right. Before the worksheet even touches on what activities we enjoy, it establishes the parameters of when and why they happen. It defines free time as, quote, time when you have no work to do.
Okay.
And it defines a hobby as an activity you do for pleasure in your free time.
Those seem pretty straightforward on the surface, don't they?
On the surface, sure. But, I mean, I have to challenge that definition of free time right away. It's incredibly binary.
How so?
Well, if free time is strictly time when you have no work to do, where do we put literally everything else that keeps us alive?
Ah, the life maintenance stuff.
Yes. Like if I'm at the DMV renewing my license, I'm technically not at work. So is that free time?
Probably doesn't feel like it.
No. Is doing my laundry or sitting in gridlock traffic free time? Because I certainly don't feel free when I'm scrubbing a frying pan.
You're right. It's a completely artificial binary.
Yeah.
As fluent speakers, our brains immediately jump to those gray areas, the chores, obligations, errands.
Right, the nuances.
But if we analyze the mechanism of early language acquisition, that binary makes perfect psychological sense.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because when a beginner encounters a new language, their working memory is experiencing a severe bottleneck.
A bottleneck because, like, they are translating, parsing sounds, and trying to remember vocabulary all at once.
Precisely. The human brain can only hold a few new pieces of information in its active workspace at one time.
So they're already maxed out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If this worksheet were to introduce the concept of, say, mandatory life maintenance alongside employment and leisure, the bottleneck clogs, the learner just gets paralyzed.
I see.
So the curriculum designers have to create a pristine black and white category first. Work versus no work.
Wow, okay. So you have to build the box before you can start throwing things out of it.
That's a perfect analogy. And look at how that pristine category sets up the definition of a hobby.
Okay, let's look at it.
The worksheet says a hobby is simply an activity done for pleasure. Think about how radically different that is from how many adults treat hobbies today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the modern adult hobby is basically a second job now.
It really is.
If you like baking, someone tells you to start an artisanal sourdough Instagram account. Or, you know, if you like woodworking, you should be selling cutting boards online.
We constantly conflate hobbies with productivity or skill mastery. But this worksheet completely rejects that.
It just ignores the hustle culture entirely.
It does. It doesn't ask if you are good at the activity, doesn't ask if it's productive. By anchoring free time merely as the absence of work, it creates this open psychological sandbox where the sole metric for success is pleasure.
Okay, that is a remarkably liberating way to look at our time. A mental sandbox where only pleasure matters. I love that.
It's refreshing.
So, moving on from the context of free time, the guide starts handing the learner the actual toys for that sandbox, the concrete actions.
Right, the specific vocabulary words.
Yeah. Let's look at two of the action verbs they focus on, play and draw.
The transition from the abstract concept of time to the physical reality of an action.
Right. Now, the definition of play is pretty standard. It says to participate in a sport or game, but then we get to draw.
This one is interesting.
Yeah, the guide defines drawing as to create a picture with a pencil or pen. And I read that and immediately felt a little defensive on behalf of artists. Like, why restrict it to just a pencil or pen?
Because it excludes so much else.
Completely. If I'm using charcoal, am I not drawing? What if I have, like, an expensive digital tablet or markers or pastels?
Right.
Telling a learner that drawing only happens with a pen or pencil feels strangely inaccurate. Wouldn't it be better to just say creating a picture with a tool?
Well, it feels exclusionary to us, sure, but what we're looking at here is a classic application of prototype theory.
Prototype theory. Okay, wait, what is that?
So in cognitive linguistics, human beings don't actually categorize things by rigid checklists. We categorize them by comparing them to a prototype.
A prototype meaning like the standard version of something.
Basically, yeah. It's the most typical central example of a category. So if I ask you to picture a bird, you probably picture something like a robin or a sparrow.
Right. A little brown bird.
You don't picture a penguin or an ostrich, even though they are technically birds.
No, definitely not.
The robin is the prototype. So when teaching a completely alien concept to an adult, abstraction is the enemy.
I see where this is going.
If the definition was to produce a graphical representation using various mediums.
The beginner has absolutely nothing to hold on to.
Exactly. They'd be translating 5 different complex words just to understand the one basic word they're actually trying to learn.
So the guide hands them the absolute prototype of drawing a pencil.
Yes. It gives them a highly specific, easily visualizable image to map the new word onto.
That makes a ton of sense.
And once that neural pathway is secure, once they know draw means making lines on paper with a pencil, they can easily expand that category later to include an iPad or charcoal.
Right. You give them the most recognizable tool to anchor the action. It's like teaching a kid what a dog is by showing them a golden retriever, not a hairless chihuahua.
Precisely. You have to ground the concept in the physical world first.
Okay, so we have these grounded physical actions, drawing with a pen, playing a game. But then this guide takes a very strange turn.
It gets a bit philosophical.
It does. It moves away from the concrete and tries to define something entirely sensory and abstract. It tackles the concept of music.
And this is arguably the most fascinating part of the entire document.
It blew my mind a little bit. The worksheet defines music as, quote, sounds that make people feel happy or relaxed.
Yeah.
Let's just pause on that. For a basic fill-in-the-blank vocabulary list, that is a wildly poetic definition.
It completely ignores the structural reality of what music actually is.
It really does. There is zero mention of instruments, nothing about rhythm or melody or vocal cords or acoustics, but I do have a major bone to pick with the emotional limitation here.
The happy or relaxed part.
Yeah, sounds that make people feel happy or relaxed. Is music only happy or relaxed?
You're thinking of music that provokes other, maybe darker emotions.
Of course. Think about a devastating heartbreak ballad that you listen to specifically because you want to cry in your car.
Well, we've all been there.
Or think about putting on like an aggressive, screaming heavy metal anthem before you attempt a heavy lift at the gym.
Right.
That metal isn't making me feel relaxed, and it's certainly not meant to make me feel happy in the traditional sense. So by this worksheet's definition, are a tragic opera and a death metal album not music?
It's a brilliant question. And it really forces us to look at the difference between a structural definition and a functional definition.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Structurally, yes, the opera and the metal are music. We know that. But let's contextualize this within the overarching theme of the worksheet, which is communicating about pleasure in our free time.
Right, the whole point of this lesson is equipping someone to talk about what they enjoy.
Exactly. The source isn't trying to write an encyclopedia entry for a music theory student. It is defining music strictly by its positive emotional utility to the listener.
It's emotional utility.
Yeah. Think about it. Why do we seek out that heartbreak ballad or that aggressive metal track?
Well, usually to process an emotion, right? To get a release.
Yes. For emotional regulation. We listen to the sad song to achieve catharsis, which ultimately leaves us feeling a sense of relief or comfort.
Which is a form of relaxation.
Precisely. A form of happiness or relaxation. By defining music as sounds that make people feel happy or relaxed, the guide is actually telling the learner something much deeper.
What's it telling them?
It's saying music is the English word for the auditory tool you use to comfort yourself.
Wow. That completely flips it. It's connecting the vocabulary word directly to the psychological result rather than the physical cause.
It's a highly functional definition. And for a beginner trying to navigate casual social conversation, That functional definition is far more useful than explaining time signatures and octaves,
It's almost like the guide is whispering, hey, don't worry about what music is, just worry about what music does for you.
which is surprisingly profound.
It really is.
And it serves as the perfect pivot point for the worksheet. Because once you understand what these activities do for you internally, the next challenge is externalizing that.
Right, because a language is completely useless if it stays trapped in your own head. How do you take these isolated concepts, your mental sandbox, your prototypical pencil, your emotional sounds, and actually weaponize them to connect with another human being?
This brings us to the useful phrases section, where the language suddenly shifts from internal categorization to active social navigation.
And this section is fascinating because there are 5 specific phrases provided, and the order they are presented in is not random at all.
Not at all.
It's like a blueprint for social interaction. Let me read them in order. First, I have free time today.
Okay.
Second, what do you do in your free time? Third, I like to listen to music. Fourth, she likes to draw pictures. And fifth, we play games together.
Notice the shift in pronouns there.
Yes, it goes from I to you to she to we. It is the literal choreography of making a friend.
It really is.
Think about the vulnerability of that very first phrase, I have free time today. In adult terms, that is a massive bid for connection. You are declaring your availability. You are saying, my schedule is open and I am open to you.
In psychological terms, the researcher John Gottman calls those bids for connection.
Bids for connection.
Yeah, it's an attempt to turn toward another person.
Yep.
But it's risky, right? Because it requires admitting you aren't busy. And in our modern culture, being busy is often equated with being important.
Exactly. We love to perform how busy we are. Oh, I'm so swamped. I'm so crazy right now. So starting with, I have free time today is a radically honest opening.
It strips away the ego.
It does. Then the choreography moves to curiosity. What do? It's passing the conversational ball, and then sharing personal affinity. I like to listen to music.
That phrase right there, I like to, is perhaps the most vital tool on the entire page.
The guide specifically highlights it. It gives the formula, I like to, plus an action word.
Because that formula is a universal social key. Human beings form tribal bonds based on shared affinities.
Right, we like people who like what we like.
Exactly. When you give a learner the ability to clearly state, I like to blank, you're giving them a mechanism to scan the social environment for their tribe.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
It unlocks hundreds of conversational doors. If someone says, I like to draw, and you reply, I like to draw too, you have instantly established a micro-community.
And that leads perfectly to the final 2 phrases, which expand that community. She likes to draw, acknowledging a third party. And finally, the culmination of the whole process, we play games together. The ultimate shared experience.
The we.
Yeah, it really is a masterclass in socializing, just disguised as grammar.
But as any language learner knows, understanding the choreography conceptually and actually executing it in real time are 2 very different things.
Which brings us to the methodology. How does this guide actually recommend the learner practice these social keys?
The practice exercises are where we see how to bypass that working memory bottleneck we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the guide offers 2 explicit practical tips. First, talk about one simple hobby every day. And second, keep it simple. Just say, my hobby is blank.
So straightforward.
And the exercises are literally just fill in the blank sentences. In my free time, or my favorite hobby is. It is aggressively simple.
To the point where an adult might feel a bit silly practicing it.
I think they absolutely would, because as adults, we want to express our full, complex personalities immediately.
Right, we don't want to sound like children.
Exactly. We want to explain why we like independent foreign films, not just say, I like movies. It reminds me of the classic mistake people make when they try to learn a new skill. Let's say laying down train tracks.
Train tracks. Okay, where are we going with this?
Yeah, hear me out. Think about communication as a train. You have a thought at point A, and you need to get it to point B into someone else's head.
Okay.
To do that, you need a simple, unbroken loop of track. That loop is a basic subject-verb-object sentence. I like books. The train can run on that perfectly.
Sure.
But as adults, we get impatient. We want to build Grand Central Station on day 1. We start trying to build complex switching stations of dependent clauses, past perfect tenses, and nuanced adjectives before we've even laid the main loop.
And what happens? The train derails.
Every single time. You stumble, you use the wrong tense, the listener looks confused, and the communication completely collapses.
That analogy perfectly captures the danger of cognitive overload. When an adult tries to build Grand Central Station on day 1 and inevitably fails, the brain reacts strongly.
It gets defensive.
It triggers the stress response, frustration, embarrassment. We go into a mild fight, flight, or freeze state.
Oh, wow.
And in language learning, that usually means we freeze up, close the book, and walk away entirely.
We quit before we've even really started.
Exactly. So look at what this worksheet's methodology is doing by insisting on one simple hobby every day and keep it simple. It is deliberately restricting the learner to laying that single loop of track.
By doing so, it guarantees a daily win.
And winning feels good.
It really does.
It creates a biological response. When you successfully fill in that blank, I like to read, and you say it to someone, and they actually understand you, your brain releases a hit of dopamine.
Right, the reward center.
You completed the task. You communicated. By forcing the learner to stay incredibly simple, the guide short-circuits frustration and replaces it with a dopamine loop. It makes the act of learning the language a pleasurable habit in itself.
Wow. It's almost recursive, isn't it?
How do you mean?
The guide about hobbies transforms the act of studying into a hobby.
Oh, that's brilliant. It connects the vocabulary word for pleasure directly to the experience of learning it.
That is incredibly smart design, and as we look at the big picture of this deep dive, I think that's the ultimate takeaway here.
Yeah.
This simple one-page vocabulary list, designed for people who are just starting their English journey, actually holds a mirror up to those of us who already speak the language fluently.
It forces us to confront how much unnecessary complexity we've layered onto our own lives.
It really does. It strips away the side hustles, the need to monetize our passions, the urge to perform our busyness, and the ego of wanting to sound sophisticated.
It brings us back to a baseline.
A baseline where free time is just a sandbox with no work in it, where music is just sound that brings us comfort, and where a hobby is simply an action we take because it brings us joy.
It's a powerful reminder that underneath all our professional expertise and adult responsibilities, the architecture of human connection is actually remarkably simple.
It really is.
It's just, I have free time, and what do you like to do?
The foundational joy of shared affinity. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today.
Let's hear it.
I want you to look at your own life, your own passions, through this beginner's lens. Think about your ultimate, most complex hobby, the thing you dedicate hours of your life to, the thing that requires specialized gear or years of training.
Picture it clearly.
Now, if you were forced to describe that passion using only this beginner's formula, if you had to strip away all the technical jargon, the prestige, and the nuance, and focus only on the absolute core action and the simple emotion it brings, what would that sentence be?
That's a tough exercise.
It is. And more importantly, if you strip it down to those fundamental building blocks, what hidden truth might that simple sentence reveal about why you really love it?